Official state funerals for American presidents are rare and solemn occasions. There have only been 14 official state funerals in the United States, starting in 1841 for the first American president to die in office, William Henry Harrison, and continuing with almost every other American president to die in office, with the exception of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, as a decision was made not to have a ceremony in the waning days of World War II. The tradition has continued with most modern chief executives, regardless of their dates of death, also being given official state funerals, with one more exception, Richard Nixon. As of this History Graveyard Series video, which I'm taping in late July 2024, the most recent presidential state funeral was held in December 2018 after the death of George H.W. Bush, and this video is going to focus on the process and imagery of those ceremonies. The 14 American official state funerals since the 1840s have all offered pomp and circumstance, solemnity, and a chance for a nation to honor departed presidents, as well as other beloved national figures who have been awarded the honor, such as Douglas MacArthur, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then the unknown soldiers who perished during World Wars I, II, and the Korean War. What goes into an official presidential state funeral, and how do they start the healing process for a national leader? To answer these questions, I first went to the National Museum of Funeral History in Houston, Texas, which has a permanent exhibit on presidential funerals. Here's a look at that exhibit space. After looking at exhibits on both George H.W. Bush and Abraham Lincoln, I then went into the main exhibit hall, and here you can see a nice panel on George Washington, of course, the first American president to die back in 1799. Now, this was not a presidential state funeral. That concept didn't exist yet in America. But, of course, America wanted to honor its father of its country, and here you see a copy of the eulogy that was delivered, along with some other information from 1799. Next to Washington is a nice corner that's devoted to John F. Kennedy after his assassination in Texas in 1963. There's a diorama, certificate of authenticity related to the items in this display case, and then imagery and newspapers from around the country as America was mourning. A replica of the hearse, the type of coffin that was used for both Kennedy and his First Lady later, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, as well as both the Nixons. Richard Nixon and his First Lady, Pat Nixon, had similar type of caskets. This museum has quite a bit of exhibits on different types of caskets. Next to Kennedy, you see more information on another president, Ronald Reagan, who, of course, one of the buried and honored in the 21st century. Most nations around the world today continue to conduct state funerals, and the services, which can also be very similar to royal ceremonial funerals, can be traced back to the funeral of Britain's Queen Mary I in 1558 or Queen Elizabeth I in 1603. According to their official definitions, American state funerals are conducted in Washington, D.C., and require organization by the federal government, including military traditions, such as a 21-gun salute. But the specific planning and approval for these events typically is largely determined by the sitting president and their family. Although the deaths of early American presidents and other key figures, such as Ben Franklin, or of course George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Andrew Jackson, all became national moments of collective mourning, it wasn't until the first death of a sitting president, as I said, William Henry Harrison in 1841, which happened a little more than a month into his presidency. Then less than a decade later, the same thing happened again with Zachary Taylor in 1850. These were the first two official American state funerals. Most American historians would agree, however, that the first truly impactful national mourning in the U.S. was held after Abraham Lincoln's assassination on April 14, 1865, just 5 days after Robert E. Lee had surrendered his Confederate Army of Virginia to Ulysses S. Grant, effectively ending the American Civil War. After Lincoln's death on Good Friday, church services across America honored him again on Easter Sunday, and then a 1,700-mile funeral procession by train began a few days later on Wednesday, April 19, 1865. The previous day, on April 18, 1865, his body had become the first of an American to lie in state on the U.S. Capitol Rotunda. The funeral train made it through 7 American states and was witnessed by millions of Americans, including 2 future presidents, Theodore Roosevelt and Grover Cleveland. Eventually, the train arrived in Springfield, Illinois, where Lincoln was buried and remains today. After Lincoln's 1865 funeral train procession, the next 3 official state funerals were for Presidents James Garfield, William McKinley, and Warren G. Harding, who died in office in 1881, 1901, and 1923, respectively. By 1958, there had still only been 10 American state funerals, but then, beginning with the death of John F. Kennedy in 1963, there were 5 more in the next decade. And then finally, a 30-year gap before presidential ceremonies were held for Ronald Reagan in 2004, for Gerald Ford, ending 2006 into the beginning of 2007, and then for George H.W. Bush in 2018, which are the last 3 American presidents to pass away as of this video's taping. The 2018 procession for George H.W. Bush was unique. Most of the recent presidential state funerals have involved the use of a hearse. The Museum of Funeral History in Spring has the hearse that was used here for both Ronald Reagan and Gerald Ford. Although there was a hearse involved in George H.W. Bush's funeral procession, that one also involved the use of a presidential train, something that had been done, of course, for Abraham Lincoln and FDR and a few other presidents, but the tradition was brought back memorably in 2018. The museum has a nice replica of what the four-car locomotive looked like. It was called Locomotive 4141 and made a 70-mile trip between Spring, not far from this museum, and the George H.W. Bush Museum in College Station, where it resides today. And that was the most recent presidential state funeral when George H.W. Bush died on December 6, 2018. There will be other presidential state funerals. America will honor its fallen leaders when those events do take place, and History Graveyards will try to do its best to salute these men and women as well.